In the heart of World War II, amid the chaos and ambition of empires, there existed a place so secret, so horrific, that for decades even mentioning its name was taboo. Its code name was Unit 731, an innocent number that masked one of the darkest chapters in modern history. In the 1930s, Japan was not just a rising power. It was an empire expanding at a terrifying pace. The military had taken control of the government, and nationalism had turned into an ideology of superiority. To many leaders in Tokyo, Japan was destined to rule Asia. But ruling meant conquering, and conquering required weapons. Weapons beyond imagination. The story begins in Manchuria, northeastern China. In 1931, Japan invaded the region under the pretext of a staged railway explosion, the so-called Mukden incident. The invasion was swift and brutal. Within months, Japan established a puppet state called Manchukuo, ruled by the last Chinese emperor, Puyi. But behind the scenes, Japan was building something far more sinister, a hidden empire of science and war. In Tokyo, one man was quietly planning the foundation of that empire. His name was Shiro Ishii, a brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless army physician. Born in 1892, Ishii was fascinated by microbiology and germ theory, believing that bacteria could become weapons just as powerful as bullets or bombs. He convinced Japan's military high command that biological warfare could change the future of combat. By 1932, Ishii was authorized to create a special medical unit to study the effects of disease in warfare. The official purpose was research and prevention, but in reality, it was about weaponizing biology. The project's first base was built in a remote area of Manchuria, under the name Togo Unit, which soon evolved into Unit 731, formerly known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. The name sounded harmless. The work was anything but. Hidden behind barbed wire and guard towers near the city of Harbin, Unit 731 became a self-contained city of death. It sprawled across 6 square kilometers with laboratories, hospitals, prisons, and crematoriums. Thousands of scientists, soldiers, and doctors worked inside, all sworn to secrecy. The world outside believed it was just another military medical base. Inside, it was the center of Japan's human experimentation program. Shiro Ishii ruled the compound like a king. Colleagues described him as charismatic but cold, a man whose curiosity had no moral limits. He believed that to build effective biological weapons, Japan needed live human subjects, and he was willing to do anything to obtain them. Those subjects came from the war zones, mostly Chinese civilians and prisoners, but also Soviets, Koreans, and even a few Allied POWs. To the Japanese military, they were no longer people. They were simply called marutas, a word meaning logs. The euphemism helped the scientists detach themselves from the horror of what they were doing. Inside Unit 731, research expanded rapidly. Ishii's scientists tested the effects of extreme cold, heat, dehydration, and diseases like plague, cholera, anthrax, and typhoid. They studied how long a human body could survive exposure, or how quickly infection could spread through a population. It was all part of a larger goal: to develop biological weapons that could wipe out entire armies or cities without firing a shot. By 1936, Unit 731 had become officially recognized by the Imperial Japanese Army. It received vast funding, modern equipment, and full political protection. Ishii's work was considered essential to Japan's strategic future. Meanwhile, Japan's war machine was expanding. In 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War erupted after the Marco Polo Bridge incident. Japanese forces swept across China, capturing cities and committing atrocities that shocked the world. In the shadow of these campaigns, Unit 731 gained an endless supply of human subjects. The Manchurian countryside became a vast laboratory. Ishii's researchers began field tests, releasing plague-infested fleas, contaminating water supplies, and studying the spread of disease among unsuspecting villages. Some experiments were disguised as medical aid missions. Others were hidden beneath the chaos of war. The scientists of Unit 731 saw themselves as pioneers, discovering the secrets of life and death for the sake of Japan. In reality, they were conducting crimes against humanity on an industrial scale. By the early 1940s, Ishii had built a network of sister units across Asia. Unit 731 was the heart of a system that included other biological warfare units, 100, 1644, 1855, and 8604, all working toward the same purpose. The empire of science was spreading, and so was its secrecy. Every discovery, every experiment was recorded in meticulous detail. The Japanese military valued data, and the data that came from Unit 731 was unlike anything the world had ever seen. But it came at a horrific cost. To the outside world, none of this existed. Japan's government denied any involvement in biological warfare. The soldiers stationed near Harbin were told only that the base was a water purification facility. Anyone who asked too many questions disappeared. As the Pacific War escalated, Ishii's ambitions grew. He proposed mass-scale biological attacks, including plans to drop plague-infected fleas over Chinese cities and even the west coast of the United States. While these plans were never fully carried out, smaller operations did take place. In 1940, Japanese aircraft dropped plague-infested fleas over Ningbo and Changde in China, causing deadly outbreaks among civilians. Unit 731's field data showed that biological weapons could be devastating, but unpredictable. Disease did not respect borders or armies, and sometimes Japanese soldiers became infected too. By 1942, as Japan's empire reached its peak, Ishii continued his work with unwavering confidence. Within the compound, new laboratories were built, and young scientists were recruited straight from Japan's universities. They were told they were serving science and their emperor. Few questioned the morality of their orders. But outside the walls, the war was changing. The Allied forces were advancing, and Japan's victories were turning into defeats. The once invincible empire was beginning to crumble. Still, Unit 731 operated at full speed. Even as food and supplies ran short, Ishii demanded more experiments, more data. He was convinced that his biological weapons could still save Japan, that one massive, decisive plague strike could turn the tide of war. Yet inside Japan's military, doubts were growing. Some officers questioned the morality and the practicality of unleashing disease on such a scale. Others simply feared losing control of the weapon. Ishii's dream of a biological superweapon was fading. In 1944, as American bombers began striking Japan's homeland, reality set in. The empire was collapsing, and the tide of history could no longer be reversed. In Manchuria, Ishii received new orders: if Japan lost, destroy all evidence of Unit 731. He began preparing for the unthinkable. As the Soviet Union declared war on Japan in August 1945, the Red Army advanced rapidly into Manchuria. Within days, Japanese forces were in full retreat. The once secret city of Harbin was abandoned in panic. Ishii ordered the destruction of all research facilities, the execution of remaining prisoners, and the burning of documents. Flames consumed years of data, and the compound was reduced to ruins. The last trains carrying Unit 731 personnel left Harbin just before Soviet troops arrived. What they left behind was a chilling silence, and the graves of thousands who had never been acknowledged. Shiro Ishii disappeared into the chaos of Japan's surrender. Officially, Unit 731 had never existed. Its members melted back into civilian life, their crimes hidden behind a wall of secrecy. But as the war ended, rumors began to surface. Stories whispered by survivors and witnesses of a place where men of science had turned into instruments of death. The truth was beginning to seep through the cracks. The Allied occupation authorities would soon uncover something they had never imagined, a crime so vast, so meticulously planned that it would rival the horrors of Nazi Germany's concentration camps. But unlike those camps, the world would not see immediate justice. What happened next would expose not only the crimes of Unit 731, but the moral compromises of the victors themselves. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, the world thought the nightmare of war had finally ended. Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been reduced to ash. Cities lay in ruins, empires had fallen, and millions were dead. But deep beneath the surface of Japan's surrender was a secret that would remain hidden for decades. A secret born in the frozen plains of Manchuria. As American forces began the occupation of Japan, Investigators and war crimes prosecutors scoured Asia for evidence of atrocities. The Nuremberg trials were already underway in Europe, revealing the horrors of Nazi medical experiments. But in the Far East, another story, just as dark, was waiting to be told. The Soviets were the first to uncover traces of it. When they captured Harbin, they found the remains of a vast complex, burned-out buildings, laboratories, and strange equipment scattered across the snow. Locals told them of screams that had once echoed through the night, of prisoners who entered the compound but never came out. The Soviets quickly realized they had stumbled upon something monstrous. As their soldiers advanced, they captured several Japanese scientists and military officers who had worked for Unit 731. Under interrogation, fragments of the truth began to emerge. But what the Soviets discovered was only part of a much larger story, a network that had stretched across all of occupied Asia. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Americans were conducting their own investigation. But they were not looking for war crimes. They were looking for data. In the aftermath of the atomic bombings, the United States had entered a new era of warfare. The Cold War was taking shape, and fear of the Soviet Union dominated military strategy. Biological weapons, once considered unthinkable, were suddenly a subject of serious interest. When U.S. intelligence officers heard about Shiro and his experiments, they saw not just a criminal, but a source of valuable information, data obtained from human testing, the kind of testing that no democratic nation could ever conduct, might provide an edge in the new arms race. By late 1945, Ishii had been located and detained by American authorities. Many expected him to stand trial for war crimes, just like the Nazi doctors in Nuremberg. But behind closed doors, a different deal was being made. Representatives from the U.S. Army's Biological Warfare Division began interviewing Ishii and his subordinates. They wanted to know everything: how diseases were cultured, how infections spread, how human subjects reacted. Ishii, in return, offered full cooperation. He told them about the plague experiments, the frostbite tests, the human autopsies. He explained how his team had learned to mass-produce anthrax spores, how they had weaponized cholera, how they had studied the limits of the human body. The Americans were stunned, not just by the cruelty, but by the sheer volume of data. According to official records later declassified, Ishii offered the information on one condition: immunity from prosecution. He argued that his research could help the United States in future biological warfare and defense. In the climate of the Cold War, that argument worked. In 1947, the U.S. granted full immunity to Ishii and his top staff. The justification was simple: their research was now considered valuable intelligence. The Japanese scientists were ordered to hand over all surviving data, notes and samples to American authorities. And just like that, one of history's greatest crimes was erased from public view. While the Soviet Union conducted its own war crimes trial in Khabarovsk in 1949, sentencing several captured Unit 731 members to prison, the United States refused to recognize those proceedings. In the West, the story of Unit 731 simply vanished. Officially, it never happened. Shiro Ishii lived freely in post-war Japan. He never faced trial. He never apologized. Some reports suggest he continued advising the U.S. military under new identities. Others claim he lived quietly near Tokyo until his death in 1959. Whatever the truth, he escaped justice entirely, but not everyone was willing to stay silent. In the years after the war, a few Japanese doctors and nurses who had worked in Manchuria began to talk, quietly and at great personal risk. They described a world where science had become a weapon, where human life was reduced to a data point. Their stories were met with disbelief, even hostility. Japan, still recovering from defeat, did not want to confront its own atrocities. It wasn't until the 1980s that the full scope of Unit 731 began to surface publicly. Journalists and historians uncovered evidence. Survivors came forward and former members finally admitted their roles. One by one, the walls of silence began to fall. What they revealed was staggering. Between 1936 and 1945, an estimated 3,000 to 12,000 people died inside Unit 731's facilities. Many more, perhaps hundreds of thousands, perished across China from biological attacks and disease outbreaks linked to the program. Villages were wiped out, crops destroyed, rivers poisoned. And yet, for decades, there had been no memorials, no trials, no recognition. In Harbin, the ruins of the old compound were left untouched for years. Locals avoided the area, calling it a cursed place. But by the 1980s, the truth could no longer be buried. China converted the site into a museum, the Unit 731 Museum of War Crimes, a stark reminder of what unchecked power and secrecy can create. Visitors who walk through the museum today see the remains of the laboratories, the incinerators, the underground cells. They see the names, not of the victims because most were never identified, but of the scientists who once called themselves doctors. It's a haunting experience, one that forces people to ask, how could such a thing happen? The answer lies partly in the mindset of the time. The Japanese military believed their nation was racially and morally superior. To them, their victims were not equals, they were expendable. And in that dehumanization, moral barriers collapsed. Science became a tool of nationalism and curiosity became cruelty. But the moral failure did not end with Japan. The decision of the United States to shield Ishii and his team from justice remains one of the most controversial episodes of the post-war era. In the name of national security, crimes against humanity were quietly ignored. Declassified U.S. Army documents from the year 1980s revealed that officials were fully aware of the atrocities but considered the data unique and valuable. Some scientists in America even debated whether to reproduce Ishii's work under safer, controlled conditions. It is one of the great ironies of history. The same nation that condemned Nazi war crimes at Nuremberg was willing to protect Japanese war criminals for scientific gain. And yet, despite the silence, the victims' stories found their way into history. Survivors of the plague bombings in China testified. Former workers described how they had been ordered to destroy evidence. Families of the lost began demanding recognition. In 1997, a group of Japanese and Chinese citizens filed a lawsuit in Tokyo, demanding an official apology and compensation for the victims of Unit 731. The court acknowledged that atrocities had occurred, but dismissed the case, claiming the state bore no legal responsibility after the war. Even today, the issue remains a point of tension between Japan and China. Japanese school textbooks rarely mention Unit 731 in detail, and official acknowledgement has been limited. But public awareness is slowly growing. Documentaries, films, and books have brought the story to new generations who demand to know the truth. For historians, Unit 731 stands as a chilling symbol, not just of war's brutality, but of what happens when ethics are abandoned in the pursuit of knowledge. It shows how science, when stripped of humanity, can become the most dangerous weapon of all. Inside the ruins of the old facility in Harbin, there is a corridor lined with photographs of those involved, doctors, soldiers, and nurses. Many look young, smiling, unaware that their legacy would be one of infamy. Next to them, a simple inscription reads, "May this never happen again." That is the lasting message of Unit 731. The scientists believed they were serving their nation, advancing medicine and protecting their emperor. In truth, they had destroyed everything that science was meant to protect: life, dignity, and compassion. Today, historians continue to uncover new details. Declassified documents from both the US and Russia show how much was hidden and how deeply governments were willing to compromise for the sake of power. New testimonies from descendants of victims and witnesses still emerge, each one adding another fragment to the puzzle. Unit 731 is no longer a secret, but its full history may never be completely known. So much was burned, so many records destroyed, and so many victims left nameless. What survives are memories, fragments of testimony, and the ruins of a facility that once stood as a fortress of science and became a factory of death. Yet even in that darkness, there are lessons. Unit 731 reminds us that evil rarely announces itself. It hides behind euphemisms, research, progress, national security. It disguises itself in uniforms and laboratories, and it thrives when people stop asking questions. The tragedy of Unit 731 was not just that it happened, but that it was hidden for so long, buried beneath the silence of those who knew and chose not to speak. But history has a way of uncovering what was meant to stay forgotten, and as long as there are those willing to tell the story, the voices of the victims will not disappear. The ghosts of Manchuria still whisper through the ruins, reminding us of the cost of blind obedience, the danger of unrestrained science, and the fragile boundary between civilization and barbarism. In the end, the story of Unit 731 is not only a warning from the past, it is a mirror held up to the present, a question that still echoes across time. When science and power unite without morality, what kind of future do we create? History hides many dark secrets, but we uncover them one story at a time. Subscribe now and join us as we reveal the untold truths the world tried to forget.